There we are. Please remember to silence your cell phones. All right, we are in Habakkuk. We're going to be finishing out this book quickly and moving on to Obadiah. Do we have any alternate pronunciations for Obadiah, or is that the correct one? Obadiah. All right.
Okay, I did mark it.
Yeah, I know where we are for the first time. We've only done like 8 books in a row, and you see, here's the problem. If you use a Bible app like I use to teach and to preach from, and then you don't read your Bible at all for an entire week, I know exactly where I am. But if you go and you flip around in your Bible, you don't know where you are anymore, it's a good problem to have. So we're in Habakkuk. I saved this one. You can put this ribbon thing in a digital Bible. I did not know that. I've only been preaching for 14, 15 years. Habakkuk, we are in chapter 3, which is the last chapter, last time I checked. And I love the ending of Habakkuk more than really any other minor prophet, even Malachi. Malachi, it's kind of a cheat because we already know what Malachi was writing about, which is the last book, timeline-wise, of the minor prophets. So that one's pretty easy. If you know who John the Baptist is, Malachi chapter 3 is fairly straightforward. But anyway, Habakkuk chapter 3, we'll start, somewhere around verse 10. Is that about right for what you got? So we're in the middle of what do you have? 17. Okay, we'll get 10 for some context. Is that okay? We only got like 10 verses left, y'all. It's going to be okay. Yeah. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. What happened? Now I'm reading the Apostolic Fathers. Nope, here we are. Okay. So we're in the middle of a song or a psalm or a prayer. Whatever one you want to think of this as is written like a psalm. So if you're familiar with a psalm, then that's kind of how it's formatted. But really, if you look at the Psalms, they are, in a way, a song that they would sing for worship. They are an expression of David's usually heart in the moment. He's either upset that he's got enemies, it's pretty common, or he's praising God for how faithful he is, or he's asking for something specific. But also, in a way, those psalms or songs are like prayers. They are communication to the divine, which is a very easy way to talk about what prayer is. And so Habakkuk here has this song. He's talking about how great and how powerful and how mighty God is. In spite of there being empires that are in opposition to what God would have do in Israel, he is still in control is the ultimate meaning behind there. So in verse 10, the mountains saw you and they writhed, the raging waters swept on, the deep gave forth its voice, it lifted its hands on high. The sun and moon stood still in their place at the light of your arrows as they sped, at the flash of your glittering spear. You marched through the earth in fury, you threshed the nations in anger, you went out for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. You crushed the head of the house of the wicked, laying him bare from thigh to neck. So you get the imagery there. We have that word in probably italicized letters in your Bible. It says Selah. What does that mean? Rest. Okay, so literally as you're singing this song, there you would take a breath or you would rest at that note. Verse 14, you pierced with his own arrows the head of his warriors, who came like a whirlwind to scatter me, rejoicing as if to devour the poor in secret. You trampled the sea with your horses, the surging of mighty waters. So here we have some apocalyptic language, right? So the word apocalypse does not just mean the end of the world. It means literally from the Greek, the unveiling. So you're pulling back the curtain of the spiritual realm is one image there. So the idea of trampling the sea with your horses, it's figurative, right? It's a metaphor. It's the idea of how powerful God is, that even the waters themselves are being trampled upon by the horses. One thing to mention here, this is one of those areas where you can't have utmost confidence. You can't know 100% what's being discussed. But oftentimes, especially in the book of Revelation, whenever you see the sea, the masses of water being discussed, more often than not, we're not talking about the literal body of water that we're thinking of in the imagery. We're thinking about kind of the idea of standing at the seashore and looking at the waves and seeing just the movement in the water. And that's the imagery of masses of people or nations. You guys with me? So when you're looking at waves in a lake or a pond or the ocean, you see the movement kind of ripple through the body of water. That's why the sea is used oftentimes as a symbol of large multitudes of people. So just kind of keep that in mind for what it's worth. Verse 16, I hear and my body trembles, my lips quiver at the sound, rottenness enters into my bones, my legs tremble beneath me. And then here's the kind of climax of it. Yet I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon people who invade us. So in all the previous minor prophets, I will wait for justice, vengeance, a reward, a consequence to happen upon the people of Israel because of their sinfulness. Habakkuk is the one where they focus on all of that taking place to the foreign invaders that will receive their consequence in due time, right? That's the whole point of Habakkuk is, how can a good God use an evil nation to punish his people, among whom there are some that are righteous, including the prophet writing himself? That's the whole point of Habakkuk is, how can that happen? Well, they're going to get their justice as well in God's timeline. Okay, questions for that little recap? Yes?
Did they actually sing these words, or they just read them?
It was designed to be sung.
Did they do like a chant, or did they have sheet music?
It would have been more of a chant. All the psalms that were sung in the synagogue and in the synagogues later in the temple, they were more chants. And they're not quite Gregorian chants that you maybe hear on YouTube or wherever you listen to chants from the Middle Ages. They would have been more rhythmic than that, more notes involved, but that's been lost over time of what it actually sounded like. We don't have four-part harmony and sheet music back in the day, right? So, any invitations? No. Call and response? I mean, it's possible. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is kind of conjecture, because with the closest thing we've kind of got to it is some writings from the late Jewish period during the Hellenistic period. So before the Romans, you had the Greeks, and some writings about what it would have sounded like, but I mean, that's not really. Yeah, I mean, we have a thing, if you go to around the country, you'll hear different styles of our songs that we've had for a couple hundred years. So it's all based on what their tradition was.
Well, I mean, countries now and peoples and whatever, they have something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Chants and things that they do without in music.
Yeah.
It's passed down and you learn it.
Well, it does have music, but it's spoken music. But one of the songs, when it starts the song, it'll tell you what string instruments or what instruments are to be used, or is to be sung to the tune of.
Mm-hmm.
It gives us a song that we no longer know.
Yeah.
But back then, it was very familiar to them. So it'd be like us taking words and setting it to some music that we know in our heads.
Yeah. Same idea. Our national anthem as a country was already a tune before it became our national anthem. And we have some songs in our songbooks that say, to the sound, like Beethoven. I mean, you have the actual notes that Beethoven wrote, and we sing our songs of praise to God in those notes. Similar kind of idea. Which is interesting. I mean, one little caveat before we move on is when I was in Kenya for that mission trip, I mean, they had songs that we knew, and they would sing those American songs we brought with us in our songbooks, but they had their own style of singing it. I mean, there were parts where they would break down from just the men and the women. that they would have the women echo the notes or the same verse in a different pitch or a different tone than we did back home. So they were different because they made them their own. So these songs, or this psalm specifically from Habakkuk, was designed to be sung, when no doubt it was, but it's also a prayer. So it's kind of two in one, right? Okay, now, the conclusion of Habakkuk. This one's one of my favorites. I mean, I got so many favorites, it's hard to believe, but this is one that when you get what he's saying, then if you've never read it before, it's just going to be a good one to kind of remember. Verse 17. Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on my high places. So what's that mean?
No matter what's thrown at you in life, your gratitude and your rejoicing is in the fact that you belong.
That's right. Though things aren't going to the utmost, though I'm not being blessed beyond measure, though there's no food, there's no animals, there's no life, I'm still able to rejoice in the Lord because He's my God. Rachel?
I think the last line where he makes me tread on my high places makes me think of how we talked about meeting God in the high places, on mountains and things.
Yep.
And it makes me think of lifting his character up.
So the high places, I mean, you've got an altar is the idea, right? Somewhere that's elevated, that's raised, that you would make a sacrifice on. Now, most of the time, especially in the prophets' writings, those high places aren't good because they're not for Jehovah God, not in Jerusalem where he said to worship. But just the idea of I'm able to go on these mountainsides and be lifted up, right? So it's a beautiful thought to end a song in such a way that even though I don't have much to rejoice over, I can still rejoice in the Lord.
And there's a confidence there.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that it's the deer, God made them, certain deer, where they can climb very high places and mountains that you would not think they could get to. And it's just, to me, it's talking about having that confidence thing that makes me be like the deer, who makes me tread on high places. The confidence to be in those scary places because he has us.
Keep in mind here, I've mentioned it before, whenever you see, especially in a psalm or a proverb, an animal mentioned, we're a little unconfident about what animal that really was. I mean, the deer here, sure. Could it be a deer? Absolutely. Is it a goat? Could be. So we've seen, especially in this part of the world, goats that are able to scale almost vertical rock faces because of their ability. So whatever the case, I mean, just be aware it's not for sure a deer. It's not a, white-tailed buck or anything. But just keep it in mind. To the end here, to the choir master with stringed instruments. I'm going to keep all other comments to myself. That's how you know it's got a song, right? There you go. Any questions, comments beyond the ones that are in my head that I'm not going to reveal?
Why not, chicken?
Because I'm chicken.
Okay, I have a question.
All right.
Like you said, it's accompanied by stringed instruments, but it's a prayer.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sung prayer.
Yeah.
The stringed instruments.
Mm-hmm.
So prayer doesn't have to be in a certain, you don't have to have your body in a certain way, like kneeling or bowing or standing or whatever. It's not that kind of thing.
No, it's kind of like the songs that we sing, and we're teaching one another Bible truths by the songs that we sing. That's the intent anyway, right? We have songs that have theology in them, and by everyone joining their voices and hearts and minds ideally together and singing those things about God, we should be able to have confidence or trust that what we're saying is true. I mean, part of singing, it's not just the notes, it's not just the voices, it's not just the four-part harmony, which is kind of our culture we've adopted into that part of singing, but it's the words too. And it's really tricky. It's really tricky, especially for folks that are newer, to understand what we're actually doing when we sing. Because it's not for entertainment value. It's not just to kind of have something to do before the sermon starts. It's supposed to be a moment where we all join ourselves together and say, this is what the Bible says, this is what we believe about God. And it's really tricky, especially if you don't know the language. So if we have archaic words that we don't use often anymore, we should know what we're singing about, because it may or may not be true. But there are songs that we have in our songbook which are theologically untrue, unbiblical. There are some in there. I mean, which ones are they? You figure them out. Figure out what the theology is and if it's true or not.
There are also songs in our songbook that are actual prayers
Yeah,
that are being sung.
absolutely. Sir?
Yeah, in singing, we collectively come together as a group of believers, giving praise and homage to God.
Right.
So that one accord, being on one accord, singing those praises to God.
So it's twofold, right? So we're singing praises to God, that's the first intent. Then teaching and admonishing one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, right? That's Colossians. And so you've got the idea of, yes, we're praising God, but also we're teaching one another, encouraging one another. It should be the intent. Now, do we always attain that? I got 2 little kids back there. No. I mean, my brain's all over the place. If I can just focus for 5 minutes in an entire hour, I'm doing pretty good, right? There were years that I was preaching somewhere else where I didn't worship a single Sunday in years because I was so busy trying to run the production, if you will, that my brain is not on worship. It's on, okay, is AV situation set up? Okay, are the songs all lined up? The song leader here today? Does he know that he's the song leader today? Is my sermon done? My PowerPoint done? So all that's going on. So anyway, I'm very thankful to be here where we've got some folks that can help us. Okay, Obadiah. Obadiah is a very short book. We're in that section now. We got 5 books to go. Obadiah, Zephaniah, you've got Joel, which I throw on towards the end. Joel is the one, when it comes to his date, that you have the most controversy. This is one of those things that scholars love to debate and write thesis papers on and write volumes and volumes on when was Joel written. I don't care, to be honest with you. It doesn't matter that much. If it was written before Zephaniah, great. If it's written after, great. But the actual content of Joel, to me, is the most important to know because it's quoted the most of all the minor prophets in the New Testament. In fact, I mean, Acts 2 would not take place if we didn't have Joel chapter 2. So Joel's important, but we don't know when it was really written. But Obadiah is fairly straightforward. If you're looking for a word association with Obadiah, you're looking for the Edomites. So whenever you think about Obadiah, think about Edom, because the entire book's about how bad Edom is because they went in there and took advantage of Israel while they were being taken away captive. We've got a video. Tristan, I believe. Okay. Short overview of what the book is all about. It's a very short book, so it's not going to be overwhelming to you. We should probably be able to knock out most of Obadiah this morning. So let's watch this short video.
Ancient people of Edom, which was a nation that neighbored Israel on the other side of the Dead Sea. However, there is way more going on here. So, first, here's the backstory. The people of Edom were unique because they had a shared ancestry with the Israelites. They both belonged to the family of Abraham, who, with Sarah, had their son Isaac, who, with his wife Rebekah, had 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. Now, the book of Genesis told us the story of these 2 brothers, and to say the very least, they had a tense relationship. They each later received the names Israel and Edom, which eventually became the name of the families that descended from them. And these families replayed the same difficult relationship of their ancestors. Israel and Edom had enormous tensions throughout the centuries, but they still shared that family bond. And it's that bond that was betrayed and shattered in the tragic events of Jerusalem's fall to Babylon. So when Israel was invaded and conquered by Babylon, the people of Edom took advantage by plundering other Israelite cities and then capturing and even killing Israelite refugees. Now, in other prophetic books, God held Israel's neighbors accountable for this kind of violence. And so here, Obadiah does the same for Edom. The short book has 2 halves. The first part is a series of accusations against the leaders of Edom, specifically for their pride and self-exaltation. Literally, as they lived up high in the desert rocks, but also metaphorically, they truly believed they were superior to the Israelites. And it's that pride that led the Edomites to not just stand idly by when Babylon came to destroy Jerusalem, but actually to participate in the destruction. And so God says through Obadiah that Edom will be brought down from their height and destroyed. As they have done to Israel, so it will be done to them. Now, right when you think you're going to hear more about how Edom will meet its doom, the topic suddenly shifts in verse 15. We hear this: "The day of the Lord is near against all nations." Now, why do we all of a sudden shift from Edom now to all nations? This first is a hinge piece, and it links the first half of the book to the second half, where Obadiah announces the day of the Lord, but not only for Edom. He widens his focus to include all nations. And Obadiah says that all prideful nations that act like Edom will face God's justice in the same way. They'll fall from their prideful heights and come to ruin. Now, the combination of these 2 sections, one about Edom, the other about all nations, shows us why Obadiah was so interested in this tiny southern neighbor of Israel. Obadiah sees Edom's pride and fall as an example, an image of how God will one day confront the pride of all nations and bring about their fall too. It's hardly coincidental that in Hebrew, the word Edom, or Edom, is spelled with the exact same letters as the word humanity, or in Hebrew, Adam. In Obadiah, Edom's rise and fall is a parable of how God's justice will one day oppose pride and violence among all nations in the day of the Lord. But as in all the prophets, God's judgment is never his final word. Specifically, remember the conclusion of the 2 books that came right before Obadiah, Joel and Amos. Joel had painted a picture of what will happen after the day of the Lord against all nations. He said that God would perform a new act of salvation in Jerusalem, and that all who humbled themselves and called upon him would be delivered. And in the conclusion of Amos, he said that after the day of the Lord has judged Israel's evil, God would raise up the house of David and build a new kingdom for Israel that would include Edom and all the nations called by my name. And so the book of Obadiah has been placed right after Joel and then Amos to expand on these very promises about the hope of God's kingdom over all of the nations. And so the book concludes with a very hopeful future. God says he's going to restore his kingdom over the New Jerusalem, that he'll repopulate it with a faithful remnant. And then from there, God's kingdom will expand to include all the territory and nations around Israel. And so this little book contributes to the larger portrait of God's justice and faithfulness that we're seeing in the prophets. The ancient pride and betrayal of the people of Edom becomes an example of the greater human condition, all of the ways that we betray and hurt each other in God's good world. But there's hope, Obadiah says. Edom's downfall points to the day when God will deal with evil in our world, but also bring his healing kingdom of peace over all the nations. And that's what the book of Obadiah is all about.
All right, so I've mentioned before a billion times. We're not going to Jonah. Done with that book already. I love the Bible Project for that reason alone, as it gives you a visual reminder of what the book's all about. I've mentioned a billion times that those PDFs of the images that they draw on those videos are available for free on their website. You can save them all on your computer or your iPad or whatever you have. And whenever you read a new book or read a verse from a book, you can go back and just kind of look at that chart and be reminded, oh, okay, yeah, Edomites, that's right. So let's go to Obadiah. Chapter 1, because why not? How many chapters are in Obadiah? One, okay, all right. Like I said, very straightforward, very short book. I was looking up, trying to find a timeline for you guys to be able to see the major and minor prophets being written, and I found a couple that weren't great. I've got a couple in my library. It's not great, but it kind of helps me visually to see it. Anyway, I also saw the Aleppo Codex. So a codex is a fancy word for a book, because they had the scrolls. I mean, you know what a scroll is, right? A scroll? Okay, you know what a scroll is. So after scrolls went out of fashion with papyrus, they made this thing where it's flat. You don't have to scroll through it anymore. It's actually, you turn pages. It's called a book. Have you heard of those before? But the original books were called a codex, because why not? And we have some old ones. The Aleppo Codex is one of the oldest ones we've got, and you actually see the Hebrew of where the minor prophets, all 12 prophets, wrote, and it's not separated really the way that we would think they would be in our paper Bibles. It's just bunch of blocks of text, and this all the minor prophets. So if you're looking for something specific, you really got to kind of find your way through it. So we are a very fortunate people that we have technology, and we've got the things that we have to have the Bible in our own language. Because it was difficult for many, many centuries. All right, Obadiah. If you have an ESV or something similar, a study Bible, you've got a paragraph or so about what the book is about. That's also very helpful. This is the last book before we move on to the post-exilic minor prophets. So the exile has taken place for Israel and for Judah, approximately during this time. And then after Obadiah is done, we move on to the 3, maybe 4 prophets that wrote during like Ezra and Nehemiah. So they were away in captivity for 70 years. A generation grew up and they were born in exile. And then we've got a guy named Cyrus, who's a king. He goes, okay, you guys can go back to Jerusalem if you want to. And so some folks do, some don't. Some go back to Jerusalem. They rebuild the walls, they rebuild the temple, and they kind of reestablish Jerusalem as the center of Israel. And then fast forward 400 years, and you've got Matthew chapter 1, right? So that's the time frame that we're about to leave is exile, and then post-exile, when they all go back to Jerusalem, guess what? Things weren't perfect then either. So you've got 3 prophets. Okay. Thus, so the vision of Obadiah. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom. We have heard a report from the Lord, and a messenger has been sent among the nations. A messenger has been sent among the nations. What is specific about that particular clause? What do you see in that? Anything stand out? You've been told, you've been warned. It can be a little tricky because that word messenger means more than one thing. Do you know what it is? What it is? Either a prophet or an angel, right? So the word angel literally means messenger. So when you see there's a messenger, you might see angel there, and that's confusing because we have a particular interest in angels. Do we not? I do anyway. I mean, what in the world are they? Was what my first question going to the Church of Christ. I asked my preacher, what's an angel? What's his whole deal? He said, well, I don't know, I got some stuff for you, but I don't know. Rise up, let us rise against her for battle. So here's the message that I got from you guys. You saw an opportunity to go and plunder your brother nation or your sister nation, Israel. Behold, I will make you small among the nations, You shall be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rock, in your lofty dwelling, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? So there's that pride. They live in a defensible area. You have the mountain ranges all throughout Edom's territory, and they thought they were protected. Well, not from God. Though you soar aloft like the eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. If thieves came to you, if plunderers came by night, how you would have been destroyed. Would they not steal only enough for themselves? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave gleanings? How Esau has been pillaged, his treasure sought out. So you guys think that you're okay? You're not. All your allies have driven you to your border. Those at peace with you have deceived you. They have prevailed against you. Those who eat your bread have set a trap beneath you. You have no understanding. Will I not on that day, declares the Lord, destroy the wise men out of Edom and understanding out of Mount Esau? And your mighty men shall be dismayed, O Teman, so that every man from Mount Esau will be cut off by slaughter. So, not great news. That's kind of old news by now, right? The minor prophets don't usually share great news at first. Here's the bad stuff. Here's why. Verse 10, because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. So where are the Edomites today?
It says destroyed forever.
Okay. Well, one thing to know is forever doesn't always mean forever in God's perspective. But the idea of that generation, that great nation, not being there any longer is still true today. Yes?
So are they not the Muslim nation now?
Not really. Not really. That's a whole other... It's near Jordan. Mhm. But the fact is that nation is no longer recognized as being the Edomites anymore. Their descendants kind of go back down through it, but it's not been retained as one great nation anymore. Okay. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. So in the book of Numbers, we've got this account of the Israelites being redeemed or bought or saved from Egyptian slavery, and they were led through the wilderness, right, on the way to the promised land. And there was this one account in Numbers about them looking for an easier way to go to get to the promised land of the land of Canaan, right? And they asked the Edomites, hey, listen, we've had a hard time. We've been in slavery to Egypt for a while. This guy named Moses came here and Yahweh has saved us. Could we just pass through your territory to get to the land of Canaanites, and anything that we take from you, we'll pay you back? If we get some water or some food, would you mind terribly? And the Edomites said what? No, we are not going to allow 1 million of you Jews to just wander through our territories, taking whatever you will along the way. You got to go around. So they did go around. So that's kind of the history there between those two nations having a problem with one another. But do not gloat over the day of your brother and the day of his misfortune. Do not rejoice over the people of Judah and their day of ruin. Do not boast in the day of distress. Do not enter the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Do not gloat over his disaster in the day of his calamity. Do not loot his wealth in the day of his calamity. Do not stand at the crossroads and cut off his fugitives. We would say refugees more likely today. Do not hand over his survivors in the day of distress. So God's not too pleased with the way that Edomites treated the Israelites when they were taken away captive. And here's why, verse 15. Because the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. So the day of the Lord, or the Lord's day, is one of those Bible phrases that means a whole lot more than just one day, right? It's bigger in scope. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deed shall return on your own head. What you sowed, you will also reap. Yeah, we got some phrases, right? Some idioms that kind of explain the same thing. The origin of that idea really is every seed produces after its own kind. So if you plant an apple seed, what are you going to get? Whoever said orange, get out. No, the idea is when you plant something, you'll get whatever product you plant. Apple seed becomes an apple tree, or well in the creek don't rise, right? So the idea of whatever you sow, whatever you invest yourself into, is what you're going to receive as well. Verse 16, for as you have drunk on my holy mountain, so all the nations shall drink continually. They shall drink and swallow, and shall be as though they had never been. But in Mount Zion there shall be those who escape, and it shall be holy, and the house of Jacob shall possess their own possessions. So the way you see the Israelites now is not how it's always going to be. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble. Which is going to win there? Stubble or fire? Fire. They shall burn them and consume them, and there shall be no survivor for the house of Esau, because the Lord has spoken. What's the lesson you get from that? Is there a lesson we can glean from this account? Okay. There is a lesson. What's the lesson?
Humility.
Okay, humility is a great one, right? They were puffed up because of their location. They had a good, defensible location as a city, as a nation. That wasn't enough to save them, right? They should have had humanity. They should have had, yeah, the idea of assisting those that needed assistance. That should have been there. And so they took advantage of someone that was already having a rough go at it, right?
It's the consequences they're going to suffer, not that they didn't know they were going to suffer them. Somewhere deep back, they knew.
Yeah, they knew. Those of the Negeb, the,
Pride made them blind.
what's that?
Pride made them blind.
Okay, yeah, pride can blind them, right? And now on a national level, this has some application to as a nation, but also on a personal level, right? The idea of us being willing to help those that are in need, not being lifted up with pride that can blind us to the realities of what things are going on. So those are the Negeb, the desert places, shall possess Mount Esau, and those of the Shephelah shall possess the land of the Philistines. They shall possess the land of Ephraim and the land of Samaria, and Benjamin shall possess Gilead. So they're going to be displaced, is the idea. The exiles of this host of the people of Israel shall possess the land of the Canaanites as far as Zarephath, and the exiles of Jerusalem who are in Shepherad shall possess the cities of the Negeb. So again, displacement is going to come in the future. Verse 21, the word saviors there is the same Hebrew word as the word judges from the book of Judges. So saviors or judges shall go up to Mount Zion to rule Mount Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. This is talking about the prophetic future of not just what happens in Ezra and Nehemiah, the rebuilding of Jerusalem, but also looking forward to that spiritual kingdom that begins first in Jerusalem and then goes to Judea and then goes to Samaria and then all over the world, and which nation we're a part of today. Okay, questions, comments? Easy, right? That's a minor prophet for you. You get in, you get out. That's it. It's fast food of the Bible. Okay, we're going to pause here for the morning. We've got, let's see. We've got Jonah, Amos, Hosea, Micah, Nahum, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, and now Obadiah done. All finished. Got Haggai, Zechariah, Joel or Joel, and then Malachi left. So 4 more left, and those are fairly easy. Again, my favorite is going to be Joel because it's quoted the most in the New Testament. We've got some information that's going to be clear to us but unclear to the people to which Joel wrote. We'll cover that when we get to it. Next week, Lord willing, we'll pick up in the book of Haggai and then move on from there. All right, thank you so much for your attention this morning. And we will pause there for the weekend class and reconvene in 20 minutes for worship.